Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Andy Decodes, the 12th Dimension. Sit back and enjoy as we dive deeper down into the rabbit hole.
Hello and welcome. Today's guest is the one and only Andrew Collins. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
And my co-host this evening, day, wherever you are in the world, is Nickname.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you for joining us again, Andrew. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yep.
And you are going to be talking about your new book, The First Female Pharaoh.
Yes, I am.
So do you want to just start and see what comes out?
Well, look, let's start by saying that this is a scholarly book. It's the first biography of the first ever woman to wear the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. It happened around 1800 BC. Her name was Sobekneferu, which means the beauties, which is Neferu, of the god Sobek, which is a crocodile god, very, very ancient god of Egypt that was associated with the stars and had been since the pre-dynastic period, so earlier than 3000 BC. But I think what we need to start with is to say how all this came about. And this is not how I would normally introduce one of my interviews on this subject, but because we're amongst friends here, I think I can tell the story. And that's the fact that in the late 70s, and that's a long time ago, I was involved with a magazine called Strange Phenomena. And a lot of weird stuff was associated with myself and my colleague, Graham Phillips. A lot of paranormal phenomena that eventually ended up with us doing what we call psychic questing, going off around the landscape, finding artifacts, solving historical mysteries and stuff like that. I mean, you can read this in books like The Green Stone by Graham Phillips or my own book, The Seventh Sword. And one of the incidents that occurred in 1981 was something I wasn't a part of, although it involved my colleague Graham Phillips. And basically what happened was that he started having strange dreams about this ancient Egyptian female pharaoh. And the name that he got for her was Sarai, which if you look it up, it just means son or daughter of Ra, basically. Yeah. And he felt that she wanted to try and convey something to him, and that he should do some kind of ritual to evoke her. And for this, he actually drew this incredible image of this Egyptian female woman on the wall of his home, which was in Wolverhampton, which also happened to be the base of the magazine. And basically just waited to see what happened. Now, I'm not going to go into all the madness that supposedly ensued because of this, but about a week after, this was in July of that year, he came down to see me and he told me all about this. And I was intrigued. I thought, well, who is this woman? Who is this Egyptian pharaoh? And the date that he came up with was 1800 BC. So I looked up, who was ruling around that time. And there was only one female ruler at that time, and that was Sobekneferu or Sobekneferu. And so, of course, this intrigued me. I thought, well, why should this woman start wanting to come back to this world in the 20th century as it was then? So I started to investigate her, and what I found was that it was actually an artifact belonging to her at the British Museum, which was this cylinder seal with not just her name on it, but all of the various names that she takes when she rises, to become pharaoh. And so I visited there with a friend of mine, shown to us by an Egyptologist. And, this sort of set me researching her, not just from a historical point of view, but also from an archaeological perspective as well. And what became very clear is that her reign had been suppressed, and that the reason for this was that shortly after her reign, which was only 4 years long, although clearly her involvement in Egyptian history was much longer, because before that her brother had reigned for 8 years, and before that her father, Amenemhet III, for about 45 years, is that shortly after her reign, Egypt fell, basically. It was taken over by these people known as the Hyksos, or the Shepherd Kings. And they were Semitic peoples inbound from Canaan, sort of modern day Israel, Palestine, Syria. And they completely trashed the place. And they, that they would have basically made Egypt into just another, city-state of Canaan, had it not been for what Sobekneferu did. And that was the fact that basically her brother was on the throne. His name was Amenemhet IV. And he had a open policy relating to the borders. And so did father, but it would seem that a lot of influence on this brother's, reign meant that he was letting in thousands and thousands of people into Egypt. They were becoming stronger and stronger on their influence on everything that was going on in the country. And various people, let's say nationalists, who obviously, didn't want to see Egypt fall, I think came to his sister, who was Sobekneferu, and said, look, the country's going wrong. If we continue down this path, Egypt is going to fall. And of course it did, just a few generations afterwards. But the important thing is that what she did was she instigated, I think, the death of her brother. I mean, all the indications are that she was responsible for the death of her brother, who, by the way, she'd been extremely close to for much of his reign, but something went wrong and they split and went their own different ways. And what she did was she set up, before she died, a new dynasty, which was the next dynasty along, which was the 13th dynasty. She belonged to the 12th dynasty. And this 13th dynasty would survive through this dark age of Egypt, and their descendants would eventually rise up against these Hyksos kings and get rid of them. And if she hadn't have done this, and if she hadn't have changed all of the policies to do with the borders of Egypt, and basically sort of stamping her authority on the country, there is no question that Egypt would have been lost, and the huge empire that would eventually flourish in the country, and giving us, kings like Ramesses II, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Nefertiti, Thutmose, and various other great names. None of this would have happened, basically. Right. So she was the savior of Egypt. But the problem is that because her name was connected with this dark age, somehow she got blamed for it. And I think that this caused her to be eradicated from various of the so-called king lists. In other words, the lists of all the kings that ruled. And also where she was buried was quickly lost as well. And I think she was buried in secret. There was a pyramid made for her, which was just south of a major pyramid field at a place called Dashur. But unfortunately, it was never used. So that tells us very clearly that she was buried in secret, and that within just a very short period of time, nobody actually knew where she was buried. And I say this because there are accounts of people going into tombs a slightly later date, just wanting to try and give their blessings to her, and going in random tombs to do it that they thought might be connected with her. So it's quite clear that the general populace just had no idea where she was buried. So this is it. But what seems to have happened is that because of this, when archaeologists in the 19th century started to uncover evidence of her existence, particularly in an area of Egypt known as the Fayum Oasis, which is about 60 miles to the southwest of Cairo, when they started finding evidence of her existence and the fact that she'd been quite clearly a pharaoh in her own right, a lot of questions started to be asked. And the fact that she was involved with this very ancient star cult involving the god Sobek and the stars of the northern sky, particularly those of the constellations of Draco, Ursa Minor and Ursa Major, which we know as the Plough, which is the famous 7 stars, then people started saying that, clearly she'd revived some kind of very ancient cult, and that maybe because of this, her life had been suppressed, her what she was doing. And this was written about by certain speculative archaeologists, Egyptologists at the time, but they were picked up on by a mythologist and writer, more speculative writer on Egyptian studies by the name of Gerald Massey. And he wrote a series of books towards the end of the 19th century and talked about Sobekneferu a lot. And it would seem as if there was one particular Irish writer, a novelist, who was looking at this and thinking, this Sobekneferu, she'd be a great character for a book on, for an Egyptian novel.
Yeah.
And of course, that Irish writer, that novelist, was Bram Stoker, who'd previously written a book called Dracula, which of course we all know about. And this Egyptian novel that he wrote, which was published in 1903, was called The Jewel of 7 Stars. And basically, it has an Egyptologist from Britain going to Egypt, finding this unknown tomb, bringing back the sarcophagus and the coffin and the mummy of this Egyptian female pharaoh, and eventually him doing some ritual to bring her back to life. And she comes back to life and wreaks havoc, as it were. And the thing is that the publishers were so distraught about the reaction of this book when it was first published in 1903 that they called in Bram Stoker and said, look, mate, if for future editions, would you please give it a happy ending so that everybody lives, happily ever after? So he did. So if you're going to read this book, which I would recommend that you do, make sure that you get the first edition. Do not get the later editions where everybody, lives happily ever after.
Everyone
basically,
gets off into the sunset.
Yeah, but I mean, the importance of talking about this is that his book went on to become the role model of various horror movies in which an Egyptian female pharaoh rises from the dead and cause havoc in the modern world. The latest of which was 2017's The Mummy by, well, sorry, not by, but featuring or starring Tom Cruise.
Yes.
I mean, there's no question that film was based on Bram Stoker's book. And there are other versions of it. I mean, particularly one from 1980 called The Awakening, which, if you haven't seen, is an incredible film. Most of it's set actually in Egypt. And, you know, the portrayal of the Egyptian female pharaoh, who in that they call Kara, by the way. And Kara is one half of one of the names of Sobekneferu, which was Sobekneferu, which was her throne name. And they also have her as ruling around 1800 BC. So, you know, it's quite clear that they were basing it on Sobekneferu, and they'd done their homework. And I find this intriguing. And also, I mean, across the years, I've come across various people who have had visions and dreams relating to this woman. And I mean, it's almost like she's trying to sort of, you know, not just tell us she's out there somewhere, but that, you know, she wants to come back very much in the manner which Bram Stoker and these films actually portray. I mean, I know that sounds bonkers, but I just sometimes I feel it, you know. And when I actually wrote the book, you know, I actually felt at some times, you know, there was almost a presence there that was sort of like guiding him in different directions. And that it was almost like she herself, you know, wanted this book to be written. I mean, that's a subjective statement, and, you know, it's probably just my imagination. But, you know, it's an interesting thought. But the book itself, it is an incredibly scholarly worked book, which you'll see if you want to have a read of it. I mean, obviously it's available as an audio book, as a ebook, and obviously as a you know, hard copy book as well. So you know, that's the basis of it.
Cool. No, just what you're saying that about the oh, sorry, there's a bit of feedback. Is that any better?
I don't hear anything.
Oh, it stopped now. You're saying about people that you know that are having dreams and like visions of this. As soon as you said that, because I watched the one with Tom Cruise. I've seen it a couple of times, but I watched it a few months ago. And like you said, it's the same thing where he's having these visions and dreams about her, that she's wanting to come back. I just got all goosebumpy about it when you said that. It's just a really strange thing to happen. And if that's happening in real life, God knows what else is happening.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that obviously she wasn't the only female pharaoh of Egypt. She was the first one, certainly the first officially recorded female pharaoh. But there are others, most obviously Cleopatra, Nefertiti. She ruled probably on her own for a year or so after her husband Akhenaten died. And you've got Hatshepsut. I mean, she was quite a famous pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. And in fact, she actually modelled her whole entire reign on Sobekneferu. So she must have had, you know, inside knowledge of her, which has probably been lost today. But but the interesting thing is that for the most part, people don't report having encounters with these other female pharaohs, only Sobekneferu. And I think one of the reasons for this, if we can believe that, you know, there is such a thing as survival of the soul, is that maybe firstly, the fact that she was buried in secret meant that very likely the type of rituals that would have had to have taken place for her soul to pass into the, you know, the Amenta, the land of the dead, which all the pharaohs went to, which was associated with the northern part of the sky. Maybe she didn't undergo those rituals because she was buried in secret. And also the other indications is that she committed suicide. You know, that people came for her eventually, and that she felt that the best way out was to commit ritual death, you know, you know, suicide as we might call it today. And I think that this involved the use of hallucinogens and quite literally an overdose, in exactly the same way as what happened with Cleopatra, you know, at least 1,500 or 1,800 years later.
Right.
I mean, this whole story about Cleopatra being bitten by an asp on the neck, I mean, that's just rubbish. I mean, you know, it's symbolism, because the snake symbolized medicine and magic. It was a symbol of the goddess Isis, and Isis was the patron of medicine in ancient Egypt. And she could, administer poison, she could take them away or whatever. And so, in other words, the symbolism of the snake in connection with Cleopatra is simply that, a symbol.
Yeah.
And that she also almost certainly used hallucinogens, psychoactive substances, to enter into a ritual death. So that, they didn't come for her, drag her through the streets and humiliate her and eventually kill her. I think it was exactly the same thing with Sobekneferu. I think that she realized eventually that people were coming for her, and she'd done what she did. She'd set up this new dynasty. She'd sorted out what in Egypt they refer to as Maat, M-A-A-T, which means like divine order, basically truth and justice. So she felt her job was done, basically, and so she got out.
So one question for you. So why do you think that people are having visions of her and none of the others?
Because I think that the others, I mean, obviously I can't say for Cleopatra, because again, we don't know exactly where she was buried. I mean, they're still looking for her tomb today. But I think that Sobekneferu's story was definitely suppressed. There's no question about that. And if that is correct, then even if it's not her individually, that knowledge is in the collective unconscious, if you like. Where everything is entangled, in this universe on a subatomic level. And the fact that her story was suppressed is out there. And the fact that, she herself might have wanted to tell that story, something that certainly would have been believed by her followers, that, and their descendants, like, quite clearly her story is being suppressed, then is it possible that that's the sort of thing that people will pick up on in a psychic manner? And whether they interpret it as information coming directly from her or from the collective unconscious, it doesn't really matter. But the story is coming through. It needs to be told. And as I said, in some strange ways, that's what I felt as I was writing the book.
Right. So you felt like a connection to it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Thank you for that. Can I ask, what is your favourite part of the book?
Good point, actually. I mean, firstly, what I'm going to do for her feast day, she's got her own feast day, by the way. You can look this up online. It's July the 23rd, which is this Sunday. So light a candle for her, and if you can track down the film The Awakening, do watch that. It came out in 1980. There are other films called The Awakening, so don't get them confused. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to read the preface of the book, which is a fictional setting, during her reign, where she's talking to an audience, but going through her mind is all the worries and troubles of what's happening in her reign, and the fact that she knows that there are people out there out to get her, basically. And then obviously after that, it just tells you what's upcoming in the book. So I'm going to do a reading of that, which I'm going to put out on my YouTube channel on Sunday. So if people are interested, they can watch out for that. But I think probably the most interesting discovery in the book was her association with what is arguably the most mysterious monument, I think, in ancient Egypt, certainly one that we know so little about. And that's a megalithic temple, a temple made of massive polygonal blocks on the north side of the lake in the Fayum Oasis, a huge inland sea lake, known as Casa El Saga, or a site called Casa El Saga. And this structure is just weird. It's got no hieroglyphs on it whatsoever. It resembles the type of masonry that was used at the time of the creation of the Great Pyramid at Giza. particularly the so-called Valley Temple of Khafre, which is next to the Sphinx and the Sphinx Temple itself. And I mean, I've looked into this this particular site, and there's no question that this is an incredibly ancient monument. All around it is stone tools going back several thousand years. So it's like a place of the ancestors. And I think that that's something that would have interested her. And the interior of it has been redesigned, been recut, chapels inside it, whatever. And I'm pretty certain that she was responsible for doing this. And I say that because I found 2 pieces of evidence that directly link her with that structure. Both of them are partial hieroglyphic inscriptions that were found in the sand, quite close to the actual temple, that could be construed as inscriptions involving her name. And this has never been worked out by any Egyptologist, and yet the evidence is compelling. So, and also the other thing is that the temple is referred to as the Temple of the Crocodile. So it was likely used as a temple of Sobek, and Sobek was seen by her and her own direct ancestors, as the first incarnation of the sun god Ra, because it was believed by them at the beginning of time, the waters of this lake, which was actually known as I've forgotten what it's called now, but it's called Birkit Karum in the in modern Egyptian Arabic, is that Lake Morris, that's what it's called in ancient time, Lake Morris in Greek times, is that the sun rose up out of these primeval waters there, basically. In other words, this was the place of first creation. And what they also believed was that the sun, when it set each night, it would take the form of a crocodile, and it would flow through the waters of this lake. And then at dawn, in the morning, it would come up onto shore, assume the form of the sun, and rise up into the sky for another day. And that this was a constant cycle, basically. So in other words, for them, this was not only the place of creation, but it was the place of the ancestors as well. And this is the reason why her and her family, settled in this area and made it almost the center of their entire dynasty.
Cool, thank you.
I'd say to the audience that I have been listening to the book on Audible. It is fascinating, and the detail, like you said in your own words, scholarly, it's so detailed. The level, the evidence, the way you go through different phases of building, not just afterlife and cosmos, all those connections. It's not just we found this and we've looked into this. You've looked through everything, tombs, everything you can possibly find to evidence that she existed and what she may have been doing in her reign. So anyone that's interested in history and the history of Egypt, they've got to get this book.
Thank you.
So I don't know how long it took you to write and research this, but it's just fascinating to listen to.
Well, I mean, the research, as I said, is ultimately across decades, although quite clearly you've got to pull it all together. And that took around a year. And then the day that I finished that, I started on another book. But no rest for the wicked, I'm afraid. But yeah, no, it's out now. It's out this month in the UK, so you can buy it immediately from Amazon or any other online bookstore. I mean, we're going out there in November on a tour, which if you want to come along, you're quite welcome to, where we're basically going to go in search of her and her tomb. And we will be visiting this megalithic temple at Khazar Saga. We'll be visiting the other sites associated with her in the Fayum Oasis, including the ruins of somewhere that's another incredibly enigmatic site that's known as the Egyptian Labyrinth. Now, we all know about the labyrinth in Crete, of course, in the story of the Minotaur. But an even earlier labyrinth existed in Egypt, and this actually was part of a funerary complex that was built originally for her father, Amenemhet III. But it would seem as if she transformed it into the central religious site of the whole of Egypt. And it was dedicated to the god Sobek, obviously, although it does seem as if there was a chapel dedicated to the goddess Hathor, who she would seem to have had a particular interest in, particularly her fierce form as the goddess Sekhmet, who's a lioness goddess, basically. And I mean, when the archaeologists first got to this site in the 19th century, they started finding inscriptions on blocks that had the name of her father and her. And this was basically how she really came back into popular consciousness, because, you know, the archaeologists were looking at this and thinking, well, who is this woman? You know, she's not recorded in the king lists. There was one mention of a woman in one of them, who they eventually realized must be her. But ultimately, they had no knowledge of her. So, you know, for at least 1,500, let's say 2,000 years or more, you know, nothing was known about her at all. She wasn't even spoken about in Egypt itself. There does seem to have been references to her from other cultures that came into contact with Egypt. Most obviously, Greece. In 450 BC, a explorer by the name of Herodotus, who's known as the father of history, came to the Fayum area. He visited the site of the labyrinth. In fact, our earliest account actually comes from him. And he talks about it, you know, being the place of the crocodiles. He says there's incredible underground labyrinth with it as well. And he actually said that this monument was more impressive than the pyramids of Giza. So, you know, it must have been an extraordinary sight to behold. But anyway, he talks about the lives of certain pharaohs, one of whom he refers to as an Egyptian pharaoh, female pharaoh by the name of Nitocris. And Nito, by the way, is derived from a goddess called Neith. Neith is actually the mother of Sobek the crocodile, and her form, Neith's form, is the hippopotamus. And often Sobek is shown as a crocodile on the back of this standing hippopotamus. As a crocodile on the back of this standing hippopotamus, who is a representation of his mother Neith. And so anyway, basically what he says, the story he says about Nitocris is fascinating. I mean, he says that her brother, the king, was murdered, and that she took revenge on those that killed him by inviting them all to this banquet, and a channel that she'd built from the Nile to this palace, she then let the waters in and drowned them all. But so that she, that there was no retribution towards her, she committed suicide by throwing herself into a room full of hot ashes. So you think, what the hell's going on here? Well, firstly, I show in the book that there's no question that Nitocris is Sobekneferu. There's no question about that at all. And obviously, her brother, the king, is obviously her brother, who was Amenemhet IV. But as I've mentioned, if she herself was involved with the murder of her own brother, why would she be taking revenge on those that killed him? Well, I think the answer is she wasn't. I mean, basically what she was doing is she was blaming others once the murder had taken place, and using this as an excuse to get rid of anybody that she felt would oppose her own reign, basically. And I know that sounds rather callous and rather bad, but, you know, you're living in different times. I mean, we've all seen Game of Thrones or whatever. And, you know, to know that the only way that anybody ever keeps in power is by being absolutely dominant. And because if you're seen to be weak in any way, there's no way that you would last, a few
No.
days as a monarch, basically.
Straight in, wasn't there?
So she had to stamp her authority. And the story about the canal, this is interesting because we know that during the reign of her father, a canal was recut between the Nile and the Fayoum area and the area of the palace. So this is quite clearly just a distorted memory of that. And the fact of her, repairing herself into this room full of hot ashes, I think talks about some kind of temple, or what they call an adyton, which is like a special room that's set aside for ritual practices and communication with the ancestors and the gods, where you would clearly burn incense. And that incense would very often contain psychoactive substances that, if you had the wrong doses, could easily lead to death. And I think that this is a memory of Sobekneferu's ritual death or suicide.
Cool. Thank you for that. I've got a quick question for you. Do you think that you might have an idea of where she is without giving anything away?
Yeah, well, I can give plenty away, but well, I mean, I haven't got the absolute answer. So, if anybody's got any better suggestions, please talk to me. But I think that she was very interested in this Khazarel Saga temple, this megalithic temple, I think, on the north side of the Fayoum Lake. And this was also seen as a place of the ancestors. I think that she felt very strongly connected with the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty who built the pyramids. The pyramids, the Great Pyramid, the Second Pyramid, the Third Pyramid, and they were built by the kings Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. And the father of Khufu was Senofru. And what we know is that both the Khazarel Saga temple, by accident or design, is aligned to the bright star. Sorry, what was it? I've forgotten what it is now. The bright orange star will come back to me in a minute. In the constellation of Draco, and it was actually seen as the eye of the crocodile god Sobek. And this alignment is clearly there. But what's so interesting is that the pyramid that was created for her at this place called Mesguna, which, as I said, is just south of the Dashur pyramid field, is perfectly aligned onto the same star in the constellation of Draco, through an alignment with 2 other pyramids. One is the Red Pyramid of Dashur, which was built for Senofru, the father of Khufu, and the other pyramid it aligns to is the Great Pyramid itself, who was built for Khufu, who was the son of Senofru. So, not only have you got these alignments to the stars here, in particular the star of Draco, Eltonen, that's the star, but you've also got this connection with the 4th dynasty kings and the megalithic temple. I think at Khazarel Saga, I think that she saw as being built by these earlier kings from the 4th dynasty, and that somehow she wanted to be connected with that even in death. So the fact that she was not buried in her pyramid, no one was buried in her pyramid. In fact, eventually it was destroyed in antiquity. In other words, it was razed to the ground. Somebody deliberately destroyed it, absolutely. And she wasn't, she'd never been buried in it. Now, that's actually incredibly unusual. I mean, very few pyramids are destroyed in that way. I mean, obviously some are by much later cultures who want to use their stone for building mosques or whatever else it is. But for this to have happened in antiquity is very, very strange. And also the site of that pyramid, there's a strong possibility that it was seen to be haunted from a very early age. And I mean, the pyramid, the substructure of the pyramid, which is cut into the bedrock, was investigated in 1910 by a British archaeologist called Ernest Mackay. And he found various strange anomalies associated with it. I mean, not only was its interior design completely different to almost all pyramids that had come before, but also the main, sarcophagus chamber was made of one huge piece of quartzite with other bits, slotted into it, and it had been painted completely red. And I mean, not just for aesthetic reasons, but the red was around areas where clearly, once everything was put in place, you would never have seen it. So it didn't need to be there at all. And this is really unusual. And Ernest McCabe talked about this and said, this is so unusual. Why would you want to do this? And I think the answer is the fact that red is obviously the colour of blood. It's also the colour of the goddess Sekhmet, whose name, by the way, comes from the word Sekhem, which means divine might, divine power, basically. And it's this that a pharaoh like Sobekneferu would need to channel through her to control the country. And I think that this is something that she deliberately wanted. And I think the other reason that it's there is that if she had been buried there and the tomb had been robbed, that the robbers would get in there, see this red and think, oh my God, this is a really bad omen, and get out of there, basically. I mean, maybe, we don't know. But so, there are anomalies associated with her. And with all of this in mind, I think that her followers would have buried her somewhere near this temple, the Khazriel Saga temple in the northern Fayum area. And it's an area that I go into in great detail in the book because it is so interesting. I mean, it would seem as if it was also the site of this snake deity, a primeval snake deity that would have been associated with that megalithic temple. And inside the temple, there are these 7 small chapels, which were clearly for deities of some description. And I think that those 7 deities are the 7 snakes that supposedly rose up out of that lake at the beginning of time, at the same time that the crocodile god Sobek rose from it as well. And I think that this is a really ancient tradition that's probably celestial in nature, and I think does account for why there are these really peculiar 7 chapels at this megalithic temple.
It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah. Very interesting. I will be buying the book, don't worry. I was going to say, can you give me the your website, not website, YouTube channel? So that
I can't remember what it is, to be honest. But I mean, if you just put Andrew Collins,
I'm sure. Yeah, you'll pop up.
YouTube, it will come up because I mean, as you know, recently they gave you all these, numbers and things like that, which I've absolutely no idea what it is. but I mean, if you put my name up and Sobekneferu, it will come up basically. And Sobekneferu is just Sobek, Sobek, which is the crocodile god, as we said, and Neferu is Neferu, which means beauties. So she is the beauties of Sobek.
Cool, thank you. So I'm just getting your link up now. I'm going to copy and paste it into the chat.
Cool.
So,
and I mean, there
we go.
Failing that, just go on to andrewcollins.com, my website. You can find the links there.
From there.
Yeah, there we go. It's come up there. 10:45 you've got at the end of it. They're your numbers.
Very nice. There's no mystical purpose for that. That's what YouTube allotted me.
Yeah, you don't really get much choice of them, do you?
No.
So, right, we've got a couple of questions for you. Is that okay? Because we're on the 45-minute mark.
Sure.
Right, so the first one is from Warren Hardcastle, and he would like to know, has any pharaoh ever been found in a pyramid?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you will hear from a lot of my colleagues that nobody was ever found inside the Great Pyramid. You'll find this is repeated in book after book after book, but that is absolutely not true. because I think it was about the 8th century, during the reign of the Caliph Al-Mamun, they burrowed into the Great Pyramid, obviously breaking rock, doing whatever they did, and they made a hole, and eventually found the ascending corridor, and eventually found their way into the king's chamber. And I mean, basically, they opened that, and there was a coffin inside it, and inside that was a highly decorated body. Now, the way that it's described is in Arab terms. They said, it had a huge carbuncle on its forehead, which is basically a big ruby. It carried a sword, and statements like this, which don't really make an awful lot of sense if you're looking at it in terms of ancient Egypt, but clearly they were seeing it through their own eyes. And it was said that afterwards, the coffin that was inside the sarcophagus was actually on show at the Caliph's palace in Alexandria for generations. So, I mean, that's there. I mean, in my books, I show this, and I give the original sources for this. And yet, for some reason, my contemporaries want to ignore this information completely. And if they ever do acknowledge it, I say, oh, well, it was probably just a secondary burial or whatever. But how is that possible? If Al-Mamun's men had to burrow their way through it, cut through solid rock to get in there, then how is it a secondary burial? It doesn't really make any sense at all to me. So yes, human burials have been found in them, but of course ones are equally mysterious. I mean, there was one at Saqqara, for instance, the huge necropolis that served the city of Memphis, which is just about 15 miles to the south of Giza. They opened one huge sarcophagus, which had clearly never been opened before, and there was nothing inside. It was completely empty. Oh. And that's a mystery. That is a mystery. Like, why would you do that? It certainly wasn't robbed in ancient times. So, is there some mystical purpose in this? Some people might suggest that the body vanished, some kind of rainbow body scenario that the Tibetan Buddhists are able to do, where at the end of their life their body shrinks until it's nothing under certain circumstances, and they're able to ascend. I don't know, but I mean, yes is the answer. They have been found in some pyramids, but there are equal mysteries as well. Yeah.
With that one about the one that was empty, could it be like a decoy if, say, some other group of our civilization were coming after them and they was looking for this body to take for themselves? So they made it look like it was buried in one place, but actually buried it somewhere completely different.
I mean, in some strange way, that could well be part of the truth, actually, because so many of the pharaohs actually had two tombs. One was generally in the northern part of the country, and the other was in the southern part. Right. If it was in the southern part, it was usually in the area of Abydos, a place called Abydos. If it's in the northern part, it would be in the area of Memphis, so probably around Saqqara or Dashur. And of course, obviously, you can't put the body in both. So one of those tombs is going to be for symbolic purposes and could easily, as you quite rightly say, be used as a deterrent against, tomb robbers. I mean, tomb robbing would have been going on within a generation, or in connection with any pyramid. People would be trying to get inside, at night. Clearly, this was something that happened all over Egypt. In fact, there's hardly any tomb, certainly royal tomb, that was not robbed in some manner at some point in the past. I mean, it was a complete trade. In the area of Luxor, there was a whole village dedicated to tomb robbing. And obviously selling on the place called Kerma. So that they knew every trick in the book. They knew exactly where the tombs were. They would go into the tombs, take out what they wanted, close it all up, and sell that, and then come back, the next year and take more out. I mean, this was going on throughout the centuries, and almost certainly had been going on, probably within, as I say, a generation or so of the actual tombs being laid to rest, the people being laid to rest in the tomb in the first place.
No, thank you for that. I've still got a couple more questions. Another one again from Warren Hardcastle. Does Andrew feel that this is his best work yet?
That's an interesting question. I don't know, in all honesty. All I know is that it's a book that I had to do. And I'm glad that I did it. And I've done my piece. In other words, if, there was any kind of psychic influence that was, wanting me to bring out the true story of Sobekneferu, I've done it, and it's out there for people to read. And as you said, it is a scholarly work. This is not madness. The story that I told you about, Graham Phillips, having these dreams, that's not in there. There is one chapter right at the end which sums up modern, beliefs and ideas relating to her, including the fact that some people now believe that she was the Pharaoh's daughter who pulled Moses out of the bulrushes and, brought him up, which I don't believe at all. It's completely the wrong period. If she was around during biblical times, it was during the time of Joseph, the guy that was sold as a slave into Egypt and would eventually rise up to become the number 2 in the country, the vizier, following his interpretation of the dreams of Pharaoh to do with a coming famine period. She was around at that time. And certain Arab accounts of Joseph, which were almost certainly drawn from much earlier Coptic Christian sources in Egypt, which themselves drew from dynastic Egyptian material, talk about Joseph being responsible for creating that channel, which I talked about earlier, from the Nile to the Fayum Lake. And it also says that the ruling pharaoh, which I think was Amenemhet III, asked Joseph to create a palace for his daughter. And the way that it's worded, I am certain that Pharaoh's daughter in that account is Sobekneferu. So Sobekneferu knew Joseph. If Joseph was a real character, and ultimately, as I say in the book, the chances are that he's a composite character, a memory of what the Semitic peoples were doing in Egypt at that time. But somehow all of this is definitely linked with the life of Sobekneferu, and I bring out why and how all this is relevant in the book.
No, thank you again. Got 2 more questions. Is that okay? Still got a few minutes left. So this one's from Michael Kopf, good friend over in America, in Texas. He'd like to know, is there a significance to the 7 crocs, the 7 chakras, and the 7 in the temple? The answer is indirectly, because the idea of a 7-fold division of a whole is something that's found in a number of creation myths all the way around the world. Whether it to be to do with time, in other words, it took 7 days, like the creation of the world in Hebrew tradition. God creates the world in 6 days and rests on the 7th. A lot of scholars will say, well, that's simply because we have 7 days a week. But no, it goes back to Sumerian tradition, where 7 days was a really important time period there. And in Sumerian tradition, you've got 7s all over the place. And there is a big influence between Sumeria and obviously Mesopotamia as a whole and the foundations of ancient Egypt. So a lot of their creation myths are going to have been influenced by Mesopotamia. And this 7-fold division, I think, is really important, whether it be to do with deities, whether it be to do with time periods, or divisions of something like Hathor, the goddess Hathor, for instance. She was said to have 7 different forms. And as you say, here we have in the Fayum this story about these 7 snakes that rise up out of the water at the beginning of time, alongside
the crocodile god Sobekneferu, Sobek, and then we talk about the 7 stars of Ursa Major. Now, I mentioned earlier Gerald Massey, the mythologist and speculative writer on ancient Egypt, was one of the guys that first started talking about Sobekneferu. He talks about Neith, who is the mother of Sobek, this hippopotamus with the crocodile on its back. He calls her the goddess of the 7 stars because of her association with the turning of the heavens and the 7 stars of Ursa Major. And it was because of this that Bram Stoker called his book The Jewel of 7 Stars. That's where this influence came from. Yeah. And as I said, it's a great story. You know, do read the first edition if you want to, you know, dig that book out and find it though.
Yeah, definitely. I've wrote everything down what you've told me. So next few days, Mrs. won't be impressed. I'm spending money, but it's tough. It'll be worth it. So it's all good. All right. Got one last question before you do go.
Okay.
And this is from Ancient Ruby, and she is asking: has Andrew any idea what the real original meaning of the obelisk is, in his opinion?
Yeah, I mean the obelisk itself is a representation of the stone of creation, which is known as the Ben stone. And if you see an obelisk, right at the top of it, you've got like this small pyramid, and that small pyramid is the representation of that stone of creation. So in other words, every single one in many ways is a symbol of creation. And the original Ben stone was kept at a place called Heliopolis. That was a huge cult center just in the northwest of Cairo.
Yeah.
And I think it was northwest anyway. And there, basically, this was known as the place of the obelisk. I mean, it was called, I think in Egypt, Anu, which basically means, the place of the obelisk, basically. And that obelisk was this stone of creation known as the Ben stone. And the Ben stone was the first thing that was created on land once the earth started rising out of the primeval waters. It created this perch on which the bird came and sat. And that bird was the Bennu bird, which eventually comes to be known as the phoenix in Greek tradition.
Yeah.
So that's what an obelisk actually represents. But clearly, every single one has inscriptions from the pharaoh that erects them in the first place. So in other words, they have a personal usage as much as being symbols of creation.
Yeah. Right. Oh, thank you for that. So we are now hitting the 1 hour mark. Thank you so much for coming on. Absolutely appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I promise you, I will definitely be buying the book. So,
it's very kind. Okay, well, look, if people are interested in any of this, come on to andrewcollins.com. Obviously, do find me on the YouTube channel. Lots of good stuff there. I mean, my other hat that I wear is to do with all the incredible discoveries in southeast Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe. Myself and my colleague Hugh Newman have just put a new video out on his Megalithomania channel. We go out to Turkey twice a year on tours. Come along to those if you're interested. All the details are on andrewcollins.com. And as I say, we're going to Egypt in November. So if you fancy coming out to Egypt and exploring the mysteries of the past there, then, get in touch with us.
Yeah, I'm going to put your...
one other thing. And if you're interested in this type of subject, we have a big conference in... Pewsey in Wiltshire this year in November the 4th and 5th, called Origins. I mean, it's been going for many years. Myself, Graham Phillips will be there, Hugh Newman, J.J. Ainsworth, Irving Finkel, the Sumerian translator of cuneiform, will be there. Robert Temple, the author of the Sirius Mystery, will be talking, and various other speakers as well. So hopefully see some of you there.
What I'll do, I'll get all the links and I'll add it into the description on here.
Brilliant.
This is going to go out as a podcast as well, so the information will be go out to the people that listen on podcasts.
Thank you.
So massive thank you for coming on. Really do
Thank
appreciate it. I know how busy you are and like lack of time and everything that you've got with everything you've got going on. So
That's right. Well,
really
thank
do
you for having
appreciate
me.
it.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's been our pleasure, honestly. Nickname, anything you want to add?
I just want to
before
thank
we go?
Andrew for coming on, because he is super busy. But if you're intrigued about the book and you've been listening for the last hour, then that's got to be in your baskets now. It's a superb book. I love to hear what happens on your tours as well. If you get psychics or if you find anything more, I love to track that and see if she's found or there's more clues to where she is, because it just seems like it's an unfinished story for me now.
Absolutely.
I'm sure your ears are going to be pricking up every time that's mentioned. So please do keep some updates, or maybe come back on next year if you can and let us know about your tours and that.
Certainly.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to let you go then, because I've got a couple of updates coming up for myself. The few things that I've got going on. So I'll say goodbye now. Again, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and learnt so much tonight just in that 1 hour than I probably have done in the last 10 years. So really appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All the best,
All right.
everybody.
So take care, Andrew.
Bye-bye.
I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.
Yeah. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Right. So thank you, everyone in the chat. Thanks for keeping the chat respectable. Is it respectable? Respectful, as always.
Yeah.
Thanks for the questions. He could only do the hour. He's so time limited. It is unbelievable. Yeah, so that right. So I'm going to be coming back on within the next half hour or so. I'm going to be giving away a ticket to the Awakening in Manchester, August Bank Holiday weekend. Please only go for it if you can go to it, and you will need to make your own way there. If it is en route to, if you are en route for me to get to Manchester, I can pick you up. That's not a problem. I'm going for the 2 days, the Saturday and the Sunday. So I've just, with everything that Andrew was saying, it's been quite apt with one of the things that he mentioned, and that's going to be the question. So in the next live stream, I'm going to be asking a question of what Andrew spoke about, and you'll have till, it's on the website, a certain time on Friday to email the answer. All the correct answers, the names of them people will go in a hat, and there'll be another live draw for the person who's won the 2-day ticket. And I think that's the fairest way of doing it. So if you're unsure what he spoke about, you've got half an hour to speed video it. So yeah, and it's available to, if you can get over to the UK, if you don't live here, for the 26th, 27th. If you can get over, there's a ticket there. Basically, I bought 2 tickets and thought I'd bought one for Saturday, one for Sunday. Actually bought 2 for each day. Don't ask.
He wants a date.
This hat. Andy Burns just asked, what hat am I picking it out of? So I'm going to put them in this hat. Might smell a bit, but it doesn't matter. It's all good. Yeah, so I'm going to be back on about 8:30, 8:45. I'm going to ask a question. That will stay on there till Friday. You've got until, I think it's about 6, 7 o'clock Friday, and that's when I'm going to end it. And then whatever answers I've got from there, the correct ones, I'm going to do the name drawing after Friday's show with Rob Demarest and Amanda Quill. So if you want it,
a live draw? A live
yeah,
draw.
I'm going to do it live, make it fair. It don't look dodgy then, does it? Otherwise it could be anybody.
So you get a few in the hat.
Yeah, so what I'm doing the ticket as a prize draw this month instead of the Mothman figure for the members. So I think it's a little bit of a better giveaway than a little plastic thing of a
your favourite
mystical
plastic
creature.
thing.
Yes. So if you're interested and you can get there, then come back in the next 35, 40 minutes. I just want to say thank you to Andrew. I know he's gone. That was is amazing. Thank you to Nickname for coming
didn't
on
have to
and
say
helping me out.
much.
Sorry?
The book is like the detail that he was talking just then. If you're well into history, Egyptology, then that book just will blow your mind again. So
yeah, I'm going to be getting it on Audible as well. So I'm going to get that sorted while I sort this out. So, and before you all do go, tomorrow evening, I'm doing a live investigation. It's going to be around 7:30, 8 o'clock. I've not got the exact time. It just depends what time the other people can get there for. And it's weather dependent as well. If it's really heavy rain, then it's not going to happen. If it's only slightly and it's on and off, then we can still do it because there's going to be plenty of cover. But I can... all that's on the Facebook group, on my Facebook page. It's on the website. And that's it. So if you... like I said, I'll just tell you quickly again. If you are interested in winning this ticket, please do come back in the next half an hour. And then we'll go from there. If not, hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. If you can't make it tomorrow, please don't miss out on Fridays with the paranormal partners, Rob Demarest and his fiancée, Amanda Quill. So anything you want to add before we go?
no, just don't do anything this week, basically.
Just sit in front of your computer or your phone and wait for me to come back on. Right, yeah. So take care and see you all soon.
Thanks, Andy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.